Hey everybody, it is Rob again from Valentini Garage Works. We're going to start doing a new project today. We're doing another straight razor, obviously, because that's what I do for the majority of it. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be processing a piece of 1/4 inch thick, pretty thick, get it lined up, right about there. 1/4 inch thick wave pattern Damascus. It's actually a pretty cool looking piece. Picked this up from Alabama Damascus. It was probably double this size. It was about yay big. Nice piece, close to about 4 inches in width, which is really good because I can actually get 3 blades out of it. So you can see there I've got the profiles mapped out. I've already sprayed it down with Dicom and laid out the 3 blades. We're going to cut it out. We're going to do the top one right here because it's a nice straight cut, and we'll get it processed on the bandsaw and then take it over the 2x72, get it profiled, start doing some grinding. Alrighty, now that we're at the bandsaw, we're going to use this cold cut just to lubricate the blade a little bit. I like to, give it a decent head start without trying to kill a blade. And we'll get this thing processed. So we get the billet started on the bandsaw. We're using a Milwaukee deep cut bandsaw. It's sitting on top of a Swag off-road bandsaw table. It's a great addition to the shop. If you don't already have one, you should grab one. I know there are some alternatives out there, probably some cheaper ones too, but yeah, it's a great table. It just makes everything so much easier. But we're using a 10 TPI bandsaw blade. Makes for pretty quick work on thicker materials like this 1/4 inch billet of Damascus. So we just go through, chop it all up, get rid of all the excess, and get it ready for the 2x72. And now we're over to the 2x72 belt grinder. I've got the flat platen set up with the work rest, and we're using a 36 grit belt. It is a worn out belt, as I like to use. No sense using a brand new belt on profiling, so we use the old ones. And we get the excess material that was not cut out from the bandsaw, and it takes a relatively short amount of time to get this thing profiled and ready for the next step. And now we're going to be removing the work rest and the flat platen. We're going to switch all that out for the 10-inch contact wheel. We'll use that to set the curve in the spine, set the radius. Even for a 36, a worn out 36 grit belt, you can see how much material that thing removes. And from here we're going to remove the 10-inch contact wheel and throw in the 12. And this will finalize the actual shape of the spine. And now that we're done with the 12-inch and the radius in the spine, we're going to be switching out for a 6-inch contact wheel, and with that we're going to use it for the tail. We're going to set the radius on that part of the razor, get all the excess taken off, and again, makes pretty short work of it. Just going back, double checking, taking a little bit at a time. And from here we're going to go out and use the small wheel attachment. We're going to do the thumb notch and get that set and taken care of. Definitely got to turn down the speed on your small wheel attachments. Those things just spin way too fast. You'll end up burning up the bearings on them, so you got to make sure you run those at the proper speed. And now we're over to the drill press, and we are going to put the pivot hole in the tang. I've switched out, put a brand new 16th inch drill bit on there, using some cold cut lubricant for the drill, and just packing away, taking your time. You definitely don't want to break off one of these 16th inch drill bits in the tang. You'll spend a couple hours trying to dig it out, and it's a major pain in the butt. And just like that, pop through, you switch this out, and we'll grab a countersink bit and just give it a light chamfer. And it is dicom time. You can use this to lay out the center line and the grind lines for the hollow grind, or the initial hollow, and the tapering of the tang. We'll let that dry up and we'll get it scribed. Now that the layout fluid is dried, we're going to measure off, get the thickness of the blade, divide that in half, give us the center line for the material, which will give us the center line of the blade and the center line of the tang. And then we'll also do the scribe lines for the thickness of the blade, preheat treat, and the thickness of the tang that I want to go to when we go to taper it. Well, I've set up the flat platen yet again with the work rest, and we're holding the razor in a 1-2-3 block with a can't twist clamp, and we're just going to simply taper the tang. Just moving it back and forth, taking your time on it, keeping an eye on the scribe lines, and working towards the 1-2-3 block. Trying to keep it as even as possible. And at this point, we're just simply going to smooth out the transition from the pivot hole to the tip of the tang, smooth everything out, make the transition cleaner, and try to get both sides equally ground, so there's not one side that's heavier than the other or thicker than the other. Just try to make it as symmetrical as possible.
And the work rest is coming back out. We're setting it up at a 45-degree angle. And I'm going to use this to put basically like a false edge on the underside of the tail. I think it gives it not only a cleaner look, but it also gives it a nicer feel. It's not quite as blocky, so it just gives it something extra rather than just a razor with a straight tang. So we'll get that set up and we'll start grinding it. And we're back over to the workbench. I've got the layout fluid pulled out, and I decided at this point that I wanted to do a vine pattern down the length of the spine. I ended up deciding against doing the tail and just doing the blade itself. So there's going to be a vine pattern on the blade, jimping, and then just a plain tail. And once the layout fluid is dried, we just simply again go back with the height gauge, get the center of the material, put a scribe line down it. This scribe line is going to indicate where we want to file to. That way we keep both sides of the vine pattern somewhat symmetrical. And now with the razor sitting in the vise, I'm using the spanners to set up the locations as to where I'm going to start filing. We're going to do that to both sides and get the process going. Every time I go back and rewatch this, I can't believe how much my vise actually moves. I have locked it down. I've secured it to the table. I think I need to put a piece of metal underneath it or something. I don't know. This is one of those vices that have the 360 degree tilt and twist and the whole deal. They really are not stable. But it holds the project fairly tightly, so I'm really not too concerned about it. Something you get used to, I guess. Damn, that thing moves. And this is what we're left with. And once I take it over to the belt sander and grind off the edges, it looks even cleaner. So anything that we kind of missed or were a little bit inaccurate as to where the file was, just kind of smooths things out and it takes away a little bit of the sin. And now we just get back over to the grinder and start doing the hollow. I believe at that point I slipped and my thumb smashed into the grinding belt and removed part of my nail. That was fun. And now we're getting ready for the heat treat. The pre-grind is done on the razor. I've got a couple of broken knives that I'm using just to heat up the oil. And we'll get that up to temperature and we'll put the razor in the forge, get it up to temperature, and then do the heat treat. And the razor's been brought up to temperature, 1525 degrees. Goes into the preheat treated oil and quenched off. No big flames, just keeping it moving around, getting the temperature down. I believe I pulled it out around 200 degrees, 230 degrees, somewhere around there. Takes a few seconds, not too long. Wipe down all the excess oil and we'll check the hardness. And we'll just check the blade, see how hard it is. This isn't 100% accurate, as we all know, but this is a 65 HRC file, and it skates it nicely. It's not an issue. Nice and hard. We'll take that back over to the grinder, remove some of the decarb, and we'll pop it into the toaster oven for a couple hours just to soften it up a little bit, make it a little bit less brittle. Out of the heat treat, cooled down. It's got a nice straw color to the blade. We're using a Nordic Edge file guide. These things are fantastic. I've used a couple in the past. I made my own. I bought another set, but the carbide faces fell off the one. This one here came up, and they're actually secured with Allen bolts into stainless steel blocks. So fantastic. Definitely worth the money. If you need them, pick them up. I know Maritime Knife Supply, they sell them. But yeah, great tool to have. I just basically use this, get the profile, or get the plunge line set properly, get them both even. I'll take the file guide off because I like to grind without the file guide. But it definitely, it's definitely a great tool. And now we're just going through the belt progression, going from the 36 rough grind to a 60, brand new 60. Now we're into the 80 grit, just refining the thickness of the blade, getting the edge of the blade a lot thinner, getting it ready for the lower grits, or the higher grits, I should say. Keeping it cool, constantly dunking it in water, taking the heat out of the blade, that way we won't ruin the temper. And we're taking off the 80, going to a 120 grit. We're going to slow down the machine a little bit. Taking it easy, taking our time and quenching a little bit more. Taking the heat out of the blade and just getting her thin. And everybody's favorite pastime, hand sanding. I know it's a pain, nobody likes it. Some people actually meditate. They say they enjoy doing it. Personally, I just want to get it done. I picked up the Sanding Buddy from Kyle Daly. He makes these things. They actually work fantastic. You know, they give you a nice purchase on the handle. They're nice and thick. And you can use the Rhino Wet, I believe it is what I'm using here. I just cut them into strips, and they have the sticky back, so they glue on nice and easily. They stay secure. The only thing you really can't do with it is do some wet sanding with them, because you know the glue doesn't like wet. So we just go in dry with it. Not a big deal. Might use a couple extra sheets, but whatever. It is what it is. And we just go through a couple of different progressions on this. We go from the 220 grit up to 320. And I'll use 400. I'll go up higher if I'm doing, you know, the mirror polish. But this one here I'm going to be etching, so the 400 grit is sufficient. So we'll get that all gone through, and we'll get rid of the underlying scratch marks from the belt grinder. Before we do the etch, we're going to head over to the polishing wheel, get the blade all polished up, get the 15N20 nice and shiny. Remove some of the scratches from that as well. Not going to go too crazy. We're not doing a mirror polish. We're just going to use this to enhance the 15N20. But we'll do this real quick and we'll get it ready for etching. And once we're done with the buffing wheel, we bring out the ferric chloride and get it ready for the etch. Now you'll notice on the blade, I did not get out all the scratches. I wasn't concerned about bringing up to a mirror polish. I wasn't concerned about getting out those very fine scratches. The etchant will actually not so much hide it, but it actually removes a lot of those scratches because we actually go back into it once, you know, through each cycle. I'll wet sand it down with 2000 grit sandpaper, so it takes care of anything that's left over. And those scratches are so fine, it basically comes out with the etch and the wet sanding. So we take it through the etching process. I do 4 or 5 cycles. The longest one is about 15 minutes, but I remove it in between each cycle, sand it down with 2000 grit sandpaper, remove the oxide, neutralize it again with acetone, and then put it back into the ferric chloride for its next cycle. Like I said, I go through this about 4 or 5 times until the desired topography of the metal is what I like, you know, whatever I feel comfortable with. At this point, I believe we're at the last cycle. You can kind of see the topography of the metal. Some high spots, low spots. You can kind of feel it when you run your fingernail across it. So again, this will go in probably a 15-minute bath. Once this is done, it gets wet sanded, neutralized, and then it goes into a coffee bath. I actually did a coffee bath on it for about 18 hours, if I'm not mistaken. And now that we're done with the etching, it's already etched, it's already in the coffee. We're working on the scales. This is stabilized and dyed box elder. I picked the stuff up from Rob's Wildwood out of the US. It's on Instagram. If you're interested, I can shoot you a link. He's a great guy, great to deal with. Always has a ton of inventory. So what we're doing here is just slicing up the block that I get from him into about 3/16 of an inch thickness. And we get them ready to go on to the horizontal belt sander just to flatten them and get them ready for the G10 liners. And now we're just simply going to process the G10. I've got the lines marked out for the thickness that I want, or the width that I want. Put it on the bandsaw, cut the pieces out, drop it on the floor, pick it back up, and throw it through again. And from here we'll take it over to the table and just rough up the gluing side. So we'll use 220 grit sandpaper, scuff it all up. And once the sanding is done, I'll use the scribe and just scratch the surface as well. Just give the epoxy something a little bit more to adhere to. Put a bunch of vertical ones in and then just do some cross hatching across them. Gives a nice secure bond.
Alright, so we're using Quick Cure 5. It's from Systems 3. I've been using this stuff for quite some time now, probably 2 or 3 years, and it seems to do quite a good job. I have used other product in the past. This stuff is just readily available. It's at Lee Valley Hardware all the time, so I just go down there and pick it up when I'm remote. Seems to do just fine. It's a 5-minute epoxy. Let's get it all mixed up and slather it on.
And we're back to the 2x72. I've got it set up with a 400 grit aluminum oxide scallop belt. We're just basically taking the scales. They've already been flattened out on the horizontal belt sander, so we're just basically taking them and rounding over the edges, getting them nice and clean, making them nice and soft, and just giving them a nice, very nice contour. Off the 2x72 and over to the hand sanding bench, and we're just using a 600 grit. We're just doing dry sanding, obviously. We'll get these nice and cleaned up. We'll take out any deep scratches that we may find, and we'll get them ready for the buffing wheel. And right here I'm just measuring out the location as to where the wedge is going to be placed. Now that we've located where the wedge will terminate, we can go back, take half the distance, and drill the 2 holes that the brass pins will go into. And then we just bring over the wedge, get the holes done for that as well. And now we're just simply peening over the brass rod. we've got the washers set, and we're just simply using the weight of the hammer to peen over the brass rods. Get them nice and clean. You don't want to be too aggressive with it because you don't want to bend the rods. Do a little bit of filing, get them down to the right height, and then go through, peen them over, and get them ready to be polished up. This is the part that I usually take a little more time on. We can use the peening process to actually secure the razor, make it a little bit tighter, give it a little bit of resistance when you're opening it. So we go through this process, I'll open and close it a few times, and then go back and peen a little bit more, and that'll just basically snug up the razor inside the scales, give it a little more tension. That way it's just not flopping open. And if you found this video somewhat entertaining, somewhat informative, if I could get you to like, share, and subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it. I do have more content coming up soon. Thanks again, folks. I greatly appreciate you watching.